Welcome everyone to our regular meeting of council, May the 18th, 2022. It is 7:30 p.m. Let's open up with the silent prayer and pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Mr. Hennessy.
All right, Mr. Capel? Here. Mr. Ghost?
Here.
Mr. Neff?
Here.
Mr. Grumney?
Here.
Mr. Martin?
Here.
Mrs. Cooper?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And we will open up with our first item. It's the public hearing this evening. This is regarding parcel numbers 417-230-01035-000, 417-230-01034-001, and 417-230-01034-000. This is Dovfield Partners LLC and 3Bs and K Holdings LLC. They are requesting to rezone these parcels of land from not zoned to planned residential district. And the three parcels are located along 3Bs and K Road, south of US 3637 and west of 71. Mr. Breen, we do have our court stenographer here, Sarah, ready to go.
Correct. So this is a quasi judicial hearing, requires you to be sworn before you testify. You're not required to testify, but to the extent you feel like you could tonight, you need to stand, raise your right hand to be sworn by the court reporter.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will present will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay, we have our representatives here, Mr. David Fisher, the attorney for the applicant. I believe the floor is yours, sir.
All right, so we want to share our
Judge,
screen.
the council, David Fisher, Martin Fisher.
How do I share his presentation? We do have it up.
For share. Okay.
Oops.
Oliver, Jim Frim.
Yeah, that's.
I've got Gary Smith from G2, our land planner, and Mr. Volpe, homestead right now. We'll conference for you, like, these questions on any topic that I can't answer or need some further information on. Site's approximately 80, you'll see here the map, approximately 85-acre site on 3Bs McKay, lying between 3Bs McKay and 571. Just south of the proposed new subdivision. So it's sort of an interesting, unique piece of property that's proximate to the subdivision. Property is annexed to the city in an unzoned state. We are now seeking to zone it as planned residence district with PRD zoning. We brought forth an application to your planning and zoning commission about 4 or 5 months ago. Worked with them for a number of meetings, with a lot of good comment and compromise and goodwill, I think, on both sides of the table. The result of the unanimous vote of the planning commission to recommend this rezoning to your consideration. Just a couple of notes. During the process of planning and zoning commission review, there were some very substantive changes made to the development. I'd like to bring those to your attention to show the working relationship that occurred between the development team and the planning and zoning commission. First, we moved, you'll see 3Bs McKay on the left side, 457 on the right side. We moved the main entrance to the development significantly south on 3Bs McKay as requested by the planning commission, planning and zoning commission, and moved the water feature north, which resulted in a complete redesign of the entire site. We thought that was a good recommendation for the planning and zoning commission, and we cooperate to go along with that. Second, we removed 20 lots from the development, which reduced our density from 2.98 units per acre to 2.73 units per acre. As I'm sure you know, your code's 2.50 units per acre. We're going to talk about the divergence on that in a few minutes. But this resulted in our original density divergence reducing by almost 50% from what we were going to. We consolidated and enlarged the open spaces, which we'll talk about in more detail. We made it more usable. We added amenities and added more detail on all the trails that we'll go through. I'll show you some slides on that. We increased our open space during the process of planning zoning, 26.36 acres to 30.55 acres. So now there's 36% open space in this project, which is 15% above what the code requires at 12%. And in doing so, 75% of that open space is usable for active recreation. In fact, Darryl, go a couple slides down. Next, the first slide. So this shows the open space in the project. A lot of open space on I-71, which I think all agree is appropriate, buffering the home somewhat from the interstate. The large green space in the center of the project holds a half-size soccer field and 2 picnic shelter sporting pavilions, which will show you a picture of this now. All right, go ahead and scroll down there to the next slide. 2 slides. Please. There's a depiction, slide down a little bit more. There's a depiction of that half-size soccer field. And there on the right is a depiction of those 2 picnic shelters. You can see that they pose on either side of that field area. So they'll be an excellent location for family events and parties, or soccer games for families together. Afterwards, there's a rainstorm, people get out of the rain. So very functional use. Very nice architecture, timber beam construction. Just give that slide real quick. There's 2 owners of this ground, but only one developer who will oversee the development of the property in the subject of single-family homes. The entire community will be single-family homes with amenities, including those we discussed, such as bike, walking paths, and open spaces. There will be amenities throughout. Scroll up 1 slide if you will, Darryl. This is an example of the open space at the more southern of the 2 in the center of the project. This one you'll see has some garden areas and some sitting areas for enjoyment and kind of. So very highly identified neighborhood. And a lot of discussion about this at Planning and Zoning Commission, and I think the Planning and Zoning Commission is quite happy with what we ended up with on open space and how we will get functional by the environment. Property will be developed in 5 phases, beginning as soon as we get a development agreement and final engineering done, which will take a while, but we're hoping to be able to break ground before the end of 2020. We will plat all lots when we do the development phase, so each phase will have a plan lots set. While we're planning lots, you'll go back to the second slide, please. Sorry. There. There's the 1 lot that you see next to the blue on the left. You'll see a little flag of white that's off there. That lot at that corner will be platted, but cannot be developed and will be reserved and used as an emergency access off the street, okay? Until such time as there's another access point created in the north or south of this property. We don't have to come back before you plat another lot. So it's platted but restricted. It will be stated so much on the space and stated so very well. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Total of 232 lots. 172 of them will be dimensioned 52 feet wide by 130 feet deep. But at least 50% of those lots must be 54 feet wide instead of 52 feet wide. The remaining 60 lots will be 60 feet wide by 130 feet. Did a lot of time with the planning commission on that, and some on that, to get those dimensions right, and to compromise on 50%, a little bit more. Stated earlier, gross density is 2.73 units to the acre. We've asked for the right to have 3 model homes positioned throughout the development over time. Each of them will comply with all your model home standards, parking, lighting, sign, all this. Talked earlier about the open space, how much of it there is, 36%, how amenitized it is with bike and walking trails, with parks and picnic shelters and sitting areas and gardens. What you should know is all of that will be maintained by the homeowners association. So no one will come to the city and say, you need to help us take care of this. All those trails you see throughout, the red trails you see connecting all the neighborhoods and all development. All the things I talked about, the picnic shelters, the soccer fields, the open space, the gardens, all those are owned and maintained by the homeowners. So no cost to the city. We have to have cluster mailboxes these days, so you know, the United States Postal Service requires that. That will be in that little green space, the light green space there, where we're talking about the garden. So that's where that will be situated. We'll talk about architecture in a minute. We've got some slides on that, some updated slides, and you've seen that. To proceed, we need 8 divergences. Now, that will list with you. Daryl, will scroll on down, those are all listed. You'll also find them in your text if you care to look at that text in your practice. The first is intensity of use. Your code says you cannot have a density in excess of 2.5 dwelling units unless there are certain criteria. So I mentioned here earlier, we're at 2.73 as we finally it up. And that's what we consider, that request is based on bonuses, which are the property directly adjacent and easily accessible to major thoroughfares, and it's developed in a high quality building design and site design. We feel that the property meets both of those bonus standards, and therefore that density divergence bonuses appropriate. The second divergence is also on intensity of use. The basic says you can't have more than 3 units per acre. I went over earlier with you the lot sizes. So geographically, we could have more of that required number of lots in any one acre, just because the way the geology works out. So I think it's a big ask to done that many times before. But that's what that's all about. They're really tight with that. Divergence 3 is front yard setbacks. Your code requires setbacks of 40 feet from right of way, but if the right of way is less than 60 feet, then no codes within 75 feet of the center line. We're asking for a 25-foot setback. That is a divergence that's often been granted by the city and is incorporated in many developments throughout the city of Sunbury. We find that people prefer to have more backyard space than front yard space. 25 feet setback does allow for parking of cars, driveways, and also pushing garage, so there's no overhanging cars and sidewalks. Done it many times. Well, it's not in Ohio. We've done it many times here in Sunbury. We think that's an important solution. 4 is side yard setbacks. Your code requires a 7-foot side yard setback with a minimum distance of 14 feet between dwelling units. We worked a while with your planning and zoning commission on this, and we compromised at 6 feet with a 12 feet minimum between dwelling units. And once again, we think that's a standard we find pretty consistent throughout the city as a development. Divergence number 5 is a rear yard setback. Your rear yard setback is 40 feet from the rear lot line. We're requesting that to be reduced to 35 feet, but allow unconditioned rooms and patios, porches, gun decks, those sorts of things, to encroach on them up to 10 feet. Once again, our standard is also been granted in the city of Nashville. And only on condition, it's not, you cannot have a 4-season roof. The purpose number 6 is maximum lot coverage. So how much of a lot can be covered with impervious building surface effectively? And your code requires that to be 25%. And then no combination of buildings on the site can be over 30%. We're requesting a divergence to increase that coverage to 50% maximum for the 52-foot lots and 51% maximum for the 60-foot lots. And our request in that regard is based upon the quality and the design, quality of the homes and desirability of people in terms of living space they want on their lots. Once again, a divergence has often been granted in the city. Divergence 7 is structure separation. Once again, somewhat akin to the side yard setback that your code says no building can be closer than 25 feet to another unless the adjacent walls are both masonry meant to be 15 feet, and that no building can be closer than 15 feet to another unless one of them is a firewall, freestanding, and without building is capable of using fire and building the building. You heard me say earlier, we requested that to be moved to 12 feet between this buildings, 6 feet on either side. The additional cost to comply to do that would be borne by the developer. Similar neighborhoods in the city have those side yard divergences granted. And those homes do not have exterior side facing masonry walls or firewalls. And if you would make this development do that, you end up having inconsistency between neighborhoods with respect to what you have required. And as homeowners, I trust you appreciate what happens with appraisals, that if you've got your home that costs a lot more because it had firewall and somebody else didn't have to have it, now your home value doesn't match up to the price you paid for it. Would also note for you that the Ohio Residential Building Code allows homes to be 10 feet apart with unlimited openings and allows 6 feet of separation with no openings. And we will comply and must comply with the Ohio Basic Building Code. So we don't think we're asking for anything other than what's been granted by divergence in the past in the city and that the Ohio Basic Building Code will permit a builder and developer to do. Last is divergence 8, which deals with tree replacement, tree preservation. There are what's known as some undesirable species of trees. Mr. Piles even pointed out to us during the process that your new zoning code you're working on now identifies those trees as undesirable, and consequently they shouldn't count towards how you calculate tree replacement and tree preservation. So that's the 8th governance. We had a couple of matters that are going to be resolved after the zoning is finalized, hopefully. One of them is, as you know, we're working with the city on a development agreement, which is typical for all developments going forth in the city. There's some discussion being had on impact fees, I think, with your council and your outside council. So we've agreed that we cannot undertake any site development or move forward until that development agreement is finalized. And then we also agreed we cannot move forward until all the engineering has been approved by Mr. Hall and his firm and the Delaware County engineer to the extent it impacts Delaware County improvements. So let's just scroll down, if you would, Darryl, a little further. Let's look at a little bit of the architecture. So, and these have been updated some, but these just kind of slowly scroll through these, if you would, Darryl. These show the kind of homes you're going to see here. This is what Pulte, the builder, is going to build this neighborhood. And I'm sure Jim Hills will be happy to answer questions for you about those designs. But this gives you an example of the high level of architecture that you're going to see in this neighborhood. That's great. 8 divergences. Remember why you have divergences in your code. The trade-off is, as opposed to what I call an open zoning category, like R2 or R4, something like that, which you just live with the code, the developer agrees to a text here. So the text becomes the law. So if there's a question of interpretation, both parties, both the developer and the city, have to look at the development text to see what the law is on this development. And the trade-off of that is the divergences. I know 8's a big number, but you can see a lot of them kind of overlap with one another, like the side yard things and the building separation. So we're not trying to be greedy here with the number, but we do need to have those divergences to make it work. You prefer to say we worked a lot with the Planning and Zoning Commission, compromised a lot, they compromised some, we compromised some. Cut lots, got a lot of open space in there, much more than the code requires. Really nice open space, gonna be a nice neighborhood, and it's all gonna be funded by the people who live there, not by the city of Sunbury. So with that, I'll close my presentation. Happy to answer questions you might have, as our other members are.
If we could, this is David Bream, City Attorney. I'd like to mark as exhibits with permission of the applicant. I've got a list here. We've got exhibit number 1, which would be the planned residential development text that was referenced during the presentation. And this is the May 13, 2022 copy.
Okay.
That also includes, and I'm going to put it as exhibit 1A, a grouping of maps and exhibits that were used during the testimony. That consists of a total, I'll do that as 1A, and that consists of a total of 1, 2.
Well, just to confirm, this is today's.
Yes, this is what was received.
Consists of 9 pages front and back, so 18 total sides. Exhibit 2 is the proof of mailing to the adjoining property owners. Exhibit 3 is the public hearing notice. Exhibit 4 is a screenshot of the notice that was posted on the city website. Exhibit 5 are the pictures, the photographs of the homes that were being constructed or proposed to be constructed. That was the end of the presentation. With the applicant's permission, I'd like to introduce all those as exhibits.
We agree with all.
Nothing.
Anything else? Jim?
No.
I'd like to close my presentation by making one final comment. We all live in the year 2022. We all think about supply chain issues. We all know what the price of gasoline is doing. Whenever we go to the pumps, are shocked away. We respectfully request that at the conclusion of tonight's hearing, you suspend the rules and do the second and third reading, and that you pass this by emergency so that we can be about the business of moving this project forward as opposed to waiting for a third reading, waiting for passage, and waiting 30 days for effectiveness. Each day counts. The engineering costs on this skyrocketed just through the time we've been at Planning and Zoning Commission. Nobody's fault. It's still what we live in, so we respectfully request you give that due consideration. Okay, happy to answer any questions you or others in the audience might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Does anyone else wish to speak on behalf of the applicant? Anyone in the audience wish to speak for or against their application? Please step forward, state your full name and your address, sir.
My name is William McCarthy. I live at 1370 South Trees in Careville. And appreciate it to speak to you. Because I would hope to have
meeting where we could be involved with this development a little sooner than now. I did speak with Stephen many times, and I appreciate that. I was able to view your the first zoning on YouTube, and at that time, the entrance was way up to the top of the pond. And I really didn't have much of a problem with that. I did speak with Stephen about how this development might affect residents to the north there, and encouraged plan on putting in some mulching and trees and whatever would protect those people, minimize the impact of this. And then I wasn't able to see the second meeting or the third. I planned to go to the third, but used to walk my dog at that time, so got them to walk the dog. Yes, I did. So I did do it, and at that time I saw that they moved the entrance all the way down to the side. That is impacting me and my neighbor more than where I was originally. Now, I understand that it was moved and, because of the way the county engineer was required, another main to be put in for training purposes. And with that, I understood the developer would have to purchase more land, and I think they wanted to go any further north into what's other current residents' property. So it was moved all the way down. Now, it's my opinion, it didn't need to be moved all the way down. It could have been moved half the way down to avoid impact to my residents and my neighbors to the north.
Excuse me, Mr. McCarthy, if you don't mind, sir, could you point out on the screen where, is your residence somewhere on the screen there?
Yeah. I'm ready. And my name is Jerry.
And what's your parcel acreage? How many acres do you own there?
I have about 3 acres.
Okay.
So my neighbor does also. However, my neighbor,
If you could, I think we want you to step back to the microphone so we can record this, right, Mr. Brink?
my neighbor's property, his garage faces that way, and his front porch and his front room does. So all the traffic there is going to be impacting his direction. You know, it's going to be, the lights going to show and all of that. So he's more affected than me. My driveway faces to the south, so I don't have that impact. However, I do have an area where I have an outside area where I have picnics too, and again, you know, the lights will directly affect us, and then you know any activities that we had. We're trying to walking the fall, going to the mailbox. So let me show you where. Originally, there was an impact in this product. Now, it didn't need to all of it. Because of gonna be right there, you get your turn lanes in, and not impact that structure. It also could have been moved, there's an existing pond here, and you could have had, an inlet on one side and an outlet on the other. Nice pond in the middle there with, some mature trees there too. Put your sign there and everything, and it look really nice. So there are alternatives. There were alternatives, and it seems like there was a considered. Now, as far as the storm drainage goes, my neighbor to the south is probably more impacted. So, if the storm drainage, I expect it's all going to go to the south. Downhill section. And there's a culvert crossing there on my neighbor to the south. And that is very, very limited on how much water can pass through it. And it's all overgrown and it backs up continually many times during the year. So I would like the engineer and developer to consider running the line further south. The next culvert, which is right in front of the Rogers Farm. I understand the Rogers property is where to purchase most of this land. I'm sure that they would consider this. It can't stay in the county right away. I'm not sure for sure. Hold on a second. Yeah, this culvert is right here. And if it's going to go there, then that's going to impact this little ditch. And like I said, it's all backed up. And it creates a wetland here. So adding that water, I know we're supposed to contain it and zero impact, but you know how nature is. So it's a lot of times more than 100 years before some storm happens. So, the lawyer that sending that down to this culvert right here. This way. So this needs to go to the Rogers Farm. I'm sure they'd be amenable if you don't have right away, county right away. I'm sure a lot of that happen. It would probably help them too. So that drainage is an issue that I haven't seen discussed at all. Anyhow, this does impact my neighbors to the south. And, think of where that. The third thing is the debt street. And, you know, this girl is very, there's a lot of housing there. It is very dense. And the allowing a diversion past what it has established this year zoning code does not seem appropriate in this case. You know, there's so many houses there. I'm just sure. I'm asking a question. How many homes would this involve if you were 2.5 rather than 7? How many homes would that involve? The engineers, I think it's, I mean, you have regulations to establish this, when you allow this to happen, and then all of a sudden, developers are making it. So. As far as the zoning goes, this means, I can only think of one development. This many homes, but that's on the north side of 36, 37. States. In general, it's really not compatible with existing residences. Maybe you need to know some other standard based on developments in this area. It's like that. But in any case, I would like you to hold to the 2.5 and maybe limit some of those homes. That would make a nicer interest. Give a little space there. If you do allow for movement of these insurance, I understand that you have to take another look at I'll call that ponds as well. It should be broken into 2 ponds, and so engineering wise, it's possible. I would have liked to have been around him more, and as a suggestion, if you know there's interested parties, if develop a newsletter, communicate, let us know that this insurance is being moved, and so that we can definitely appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your commentary. As I understand it, then, just to summarize, 3 main issues there involving density, storm drainage, excuse me, and entrance. So if you don't mind, we'll give the applicant an opportunity to respond to those concerns.
And this is David Bream again, village attorney. You have passed out a letter dated April 14th. I've marked it as an exhibit as well. It's exhibit number 5. Your permission to put that as part of the record?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bream.
The quick answer on the density, based on the acreage at 2.5 would be 236. The answer on the road moving south, and Mr. Park is absolutely right, the road goes to the north. Your engineer, Mr. Perkins, was the principal driver for that entrance south. There's nothing to do with property acquisition or anything else. He thought it was better. We just made the arrangement here, so you tell me that just to think about in terms of the impact of the neighbors across the region today. The southernmost basin is how many feet back? About 200 feet back from 3 Beach to Pay, which means the larger basin is about 200 feet back. So, yes, there are lots back there, but they're not going to be right on 3 Beach. We did hear that Mr. McCarthy or perhaps others would perhaps have some concerns tonight about their property across the street. We're more than happy to work with him and his neighbor with some buffering and mounding to alleviate any concerns they may have with respect to headlight collection property. The issues with respect to stormwater management and drainage are engineering issues. All that will be addressed in final engineering for the project, which must be done before we can proceed. We've heard this, I'm sure, many times, that site development cannot increase off-site drainage to anyone. We must manage our stormwater through the development process so that we don't increase stormwater runoff on any adjacent properties. We don't know what's going to happen with the Rogers property to the south. We're not part of that. How that impacts changes in stormwater management downstream over the years, I'm assuming will be addressed at the time that property limit, that property limits. So we certainly appreciate Mr. McCarthy's comments. We want to work with him. We also want to work with the city. We're at the density that we have worked with the city to obtain. We're at an entrance where the city asked us to put it. We're going to work with Mr. McCarthy and his neighbors to do some mounting and other approvals of their properties so that the impacts of this development are minimized. What we'd like to do, and we're going to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Any questions from council at this point in time?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just a quick question. Mr. McCarthy, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate it. I understand your concerns, and I guess to,
You want to state your name?
oh,
so
sorry,
the court reporter can take it.
sorry, thank you, Mr. Breve. John Grumney, council member. You said 236 units if the density was dropped to 2.5. What's the original number?
Actually, you said it on that one, 212.
212, okay. And the current number of units?
What's that?
The current number of units?
It's 232.
232, okay,
But also remember, we were way over on open space.
right, right, okay. And then you said some examples of buffer would be like mounding of dirt. Would that be at the entrance of the development, I'm assuming, or would you be, or?
When you do it on their lot, that's true.
Yes, Jim knows the whole jokes. We want to be good neighbors. So we will work with them if surmounting and plantings and things we'll work to provide them more privacy, block the lights of the cars coming out of the neighborhood. There will also be mounting and plantings along the front, in front of the development on the south side of the entrance.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McCarthy, I would like to follow up.
Well, if you met the 2.5, how many homes? One. Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of homes there. You know, and there's a beautiful area that I sure love. Think of that more. Yes. However, these people will be able to enjoy that access to. So, those homes be eliminated, slight increase in lot costs, and to I'm sure it's not going to impact this homeowners. To make better development, you know, like removing some of those homes right there on the entrance road would be nice to give you a little more breath of fresh air. If the entrance was moved to the other area, or even back where these trees are, where you could have a one-way entrance and a one-way exit around that pond. And then add a boulevard back to the homes, you know, that's definitely show a lot of quality to that, to this development. And I know whenever I'm on the boulevard, I always feel a little better, you know, you don't have that ongoing traffic and stuff. So, you know, an entrance to a subdivision like that can, you know, lower everybody's any frustration you might have on ride home and stuff, gotta ease it down. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Anyone else in the audience?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Dave Martin, council member or council person. Couldn't resist. One of the things, when I look at this, down here on ours, we have some little tiny notes that I was able to figure out. It says future ways in and out, basically, across the bottom there. Right now, it looks like it's a one-way in, one-way out kind of property. And how many houses are people gonna be driving? I mean, the traffic just getting in and out is what I'm raising the question about.
So first of all, did you realize, Dave, that we always have to provide connectivity to the next lots?
Right,
The next person.
yes, I
So
understand that.
that's an engineering requirement.
Okay,
And then you also see what I was explaining earlier, I think this lot's number 12 on the plat. This lot has an emergency access drive that must be maintained until there's another access point off the 3
Okay.
from either the north or the south.
well, that was what was going through my head was if there's an accident at the entryway, how's anybody else gonna be able to get out or whatever? So,
That's the answer.
okay,
I also want to point out, interesting about these lots out here, we told you how far we set back from 3B's McKay.
yeah,
It's sort of interesting to look at, it's just called the Rogers property, that's who's just south of us here, I think. Look at where we are in relationship to the development of buildings on the Rogers property.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I think we had another audience member who wishes to speak.
I was not sworn in.
Just ask that. You know better. Please raise your right hand.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you present will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
And please say yes.
Barry Bennett, 5401 Plantation Road. I live nowhere near this subdivision. In fact, I'm miles on the other side of the world. My comment is in general, and I do not have prepared remarks, so please bear with me, I'm winging this. If I'm not mistaken, all of the 8 or most of the 8 divergence requests are along the lines of trying to fit more houses onto the existing space. And my basic comment to council, I must have missed this zoning because I didn't hear any of this and probably missed a meeting. But why do we have a zoning code if we're going to throw it away with all these divergences? Is basically my question. And I won't worry with anything.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for your comments. Mr. Fisher from the,
I think Gary Smith wants to say something too.
okay.
I think we all need to keep in mind the geographic location of this property, just south of the new southern interchange. When we first came to Planning and Zoning Commission for this, we proposed that some of this be apartments, which next to the interchange is probably a pretty doggone good use. It would have been much higher density than what we're asking for, but we were asked not to do that and develop those all single family homes. But remember, as you deliberate on this, that these are homes just south of the new interchange on the interstate. I think you're in the 6th.
Gary Smith, G2 Planning Design, 720 Broad Street, the planner for the applicant. It brings up a lot of good questions. I mean, these were a lot of questions that were raised at Planning and Zoning Commission. And, through a lot of negotiations, we talked a lot about kind of the lot size and density. And, at the end of the day, I think where we all came to was, rather than doing this in, portion of multifamily and single family, let's do it in a high quality single family project. We can allow a little bit higher density here, given its location. Also, some of the things that we talked about that the Planning Commission used to talk about the kind of the increase in the density, were just the addition of some of the amenities and, the miles of trails that we have going through here, asphalt trails, different things connecting all of these areas in the open space. So a lot of those amenities, and I think, so when you look at that kind of combination of the location, you can certainly say that there are probably locations in the city of Sunbury where, it might be appropriate to have larger lots. But I think right adjacent to a major freeway, just south of a major interchange, it's hard to say that some additional density isn't appropriate at that location. The intensity of use around that interchange is expected to be higher. you're gonna have things like commercial, enterprises, you're gonna have multifamily, you're gonna have different things around interchange that you wouldn't necessarily normally have in maybe more of the suburban or even rural areas, of the city. So those were all the things that we really discussed at the planning commission. At the end of the day, we got full support of the planning commission, unanimous decision, based on kind of the merits of what we all negotiated together. So we think this is a good plan. We're very happy with it. And the planning commission is happy with it. So we just respectfully, request your consideration.
Thank you. Any other, come on up, Mr. McCarthy. We'll allow another commentary.
I know you've been asked to make sure you're reading, so I would also, it was mentioned that their willingness to work with us, and I can't speak with neighbor, but how would that be authorized by council? Would it be stipulated somewhere that Bill must work with 2, 3, 4 property owners on
That's good question. I'm going to Mr. Files or Mr. Hall or Mr. Bream. Could you provide us with an answer to that?
Well, I believe that's properly requested of the applicant. I mean, they're at the 11th hour of this planning session. This has been going on since the fall. So to now impose that on them, and they're asking you to approve this tonight. So I don't know how that would occur, frankly. I've not had this type of an objection to the overall core concepts of a development be made normally at this stage of the process, frankly. It is late. It's unfortunate you weren't there at the planning commission stage, but I don't know how legally that would be enforceable at this point. That's not been discussed. It's not been entertained. I haven't had any discussions with the applicant. So that is not a question that I can answer for you from a legal perspective. I will comment as to the density issue. This is a planned residence district. Maximum density is 2.5 dwelling units to the acre, but there are incentives that can be granted of up to 1 unit per acre for each of about 8 different contingencies within that zoning. Access to major thoroughfares, a high product quality and things of that nature, which the overall density, I believe, in the code can exceed 7 units to the acre is the absolute maximum, including those incentives that could be granted within this type of planned unit development. So I don't know how that would happen, frankly. At this point, I think it's being offered by the applicant without any materials. It would be gratis. I know they're going through their final planning, and they do have to come forward with us for approval of their platting, approval of their development agreement. So, you're going to be in contact with these folks more than just tonight. This allows them to get moving on engineering, which takes many months, allows us to finish a development agreement and keeps this project moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bream.
Well, I think that maybe it deserves a second reading, and if they need to figure this out, but we are definitely impacted more than, and it could have been avoided, and it can be avoided. What we have now is this paper and time of the developers and engineers, so it's a paper exercise now, and I did recognize time this morning that, but you get it right. This next development could happen next week, tomorrow. Rogers can keep the farm for a while, but that next development is probably equally sized this way. And, I guess I encourage you to work with neighboring residents in the future. More so what we have. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. We do have the second reading to consider this evening in just a few minutes. Anyone else wish to speak? If not, we will entertain a motion to close the public hearing. I'll motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
second by Mr. Capel. Any further discussion? Roll call, Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Capel? Yes. Mr. Ghost?
Yes.
Mr. Neff?
Yes.
Mr. Grumney? Yes. Mrs. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
6 ayes. Approved.
Thank you, sir. Public hearing is closed. Thank you to the applicant. Thank you to the audience members for your commentary. As I said, we'll have the reading here in just a few minutes, the second reading of that ordinance.
Thank you to the court recorder.
Yes, Sarah, thank you, as always. Okay, let's move on to our next item on this evening's agenda. That is the minutes from our last meeting of May the 4th, 2022. Do we have a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion.
Motion, Mr. Capel.
Second.
Second by Mr. Neff. Discussion. Mr. Hennessy, roll call.
Mr. Capel? Yes. Mr. Neff?
Yes.
Mr. Grumney?
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Ghost?
Yes.
Motion approved. 6 ayes.
Okay, very good. Let's go to the committee reports. Let's start down to the left, Mr. Neff.
Nothing to report. You're skipping visitors.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I did. We are in the regular portion of our meeting. Any visitor commentary for our regular portion? No one stepping forward. Okay. Mr. Martin, any committee
I don't have a
report?
committee report. I was supposed to go to fire board last week, but it got postponed due to some commitments from other members of the committee. So
That's right. Okay, Ms. Cooper, any report?
Yes, the events committee met on April 7th. Sunbury United Methodist Church was in attendance as a visitor. They spoke about wanting to have an event honoring those who serve. We're looking at probably police department, fire department, EMS, maybe even schools. It was sort of open. They're looking to do this sometime in 2023. The next step forward is our mayor is going to connect the folks at SUMC with our Chief Howard, DC Wade, Chief Kovach, et cetera. We also looked at an events matrix that Mr. Hennessy developed, where we looked at all of our events in Sunbury, and we sort of discussed who, after it's discussed at the events committee, where does it need to go then? Does it need to go to parks? Yes, these need to go to parks. Does this need to go to council? No, not necessarily this one, but this one. So we walked through that, and Mr. Hennessy did a lot of work on that. Thank you. And then we also talked about block parties, and Mr. Hennessy is working through a document that he's pretty much drafting. And he's using Westerville as an example, looking through their code and what they're doing. And one thing the committee decided was currently Sunbury had an end time to block parties was at dusk. And Westerville has theirs till midnight. And the committee decided to change Sunbury's end time to block parties to midnight. And I think that's about it for the events committee. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Mr. Grumney,
Nothing right.
Mr. Capel.
I don't have anything tonight.
Okay, very good. I have the finance report just briefly, since these items will be discussed here shortly. Earlier this evening, we talked about the street program, 2022 street program. We have an ordinance tonight, 2022.26 to consider there. We have near the end of our meeting this evening and seeing some new business to discuss regarding legal services with Frost Brown Todd LLC. And then we have, we discussed the 3 items that are going to be budgeting, going to be affecting our budget. The Sunbury Parkway District Plan RFP that's out, the Letts Avenue repairs with sewer, and some legal services. So that sums up the Finance Committee meeting. It was fairly brief. And that's it for the committee meeting. So let's go to the police report. I don't believe we have a police report this evening, and Mr. Howard is not, Chief Howard is not here. Let's go to the administrator's report. Mr. Piles.
Thank you, Mr. Ghost, President Pro Tem. And I'll be brief just because of the time we've had. I want to touch upon the fact that we have started finance director interviews. Conducted 3 so far. We've got 2 more yet, and we'll have those first rounds completed by May 24th. We had one individual that was on vacation, so that was the earliest we could get her in for a interview. Touch upon planning slightly. So far through this point in May, 12 new build permits have been issued, and we've got about 10 in the bullpen under review. So things have picked up in that regard. A thank you to the service department and BWS Middle School. I put a picture of their smiling mud and mulch encrusted bodies on our in my report of them planting the memorial tree for Mr. Weatherby. One small piece that was a nice touch was one of his grandsons was in that group that was able to participate in the tree planting. Formal dedication to follow. And what else? You'll be getting an email, hopefully before the next 2 weeks. One of the items that Councilwoman Cooper and I talked about was the need to get a couple shirts for council. So if you're at an event or going to a training thing, you can have a shirt to wear, probably one polo, one more dressy. We'll get the names right and all those kind of things. The auction was fairly successful. We raised about $15,500 in the items that we disposed of. And one other thing I wanted to mention, just came in this afternoon. Columbia Gas, they're working on a main installation. And actually the Gazette had a very detailed article about that, which I appreciate. But there's a section of Rainbow between Otis and High that they're going to have to open cut and hug the edge of the roadway because of just a very busy right of way there, and their confidence in making sure they don't hit any existing utilities. Two-way traffic will be maintained. It'll be one way, but there will be a flagger there. So the road will be open. The chief has notified Delaware 911 about that issue. They'll probably be in there for a week or more doing that open cut. They will do temporary pavement on it. They'll maintain driveway access, and then they'll come in and do a final restitution of the pavement a little bit later in the summer when the whole project's completed. And with that, I'll answer any questions or take any comments you might have.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Miles. Is there an approximate window of time on that Columbia Gas?
They're starting. Yeah, they called me today and I said, "What's your timeline?" They said, "Oh, we're gonna start cutting the pavement today with your permission." So it's they'd gotten an overall right-of-way permit for the work, and I think that section of open cut will be about 2 weeks. Again, they'll have flaggers there. I warned them to watch for stacking onto High Street because it is a rather busy street. They're taking that into account. They're going to do it in 100-foot sections, so they'll get one section. They've got about 200 feet to do, so they'll do a 100-foot section, close it up, open it up, and then go to the next 100 feet.
Thank you for the report. Any, go ahead, Mr. Young.
Yeah, Mr. Piles, just as a follow-up to the auction, we, with regard to the sale of the bleachers, I know you were contacted, and I was from Mr. Richard Doherty, a concerned citizen, about the Memorial Day festivities and the memorial service that happens down at JR Park, and his concern was without the bleachers, how they conduct it at the park. And I know he spoke to you about this, he spoke to me about that. So I know his hope was to continue to have the service at the J.R. Smith Park. And I know with the sale, it's after Memorial Day, so those bleachers will be in use for this year with some conditions for safety. I think how high we can go up in those bleachers, which was explained to Mr. Doherty. But his concern was moving forward, what the city can do to assure that service can still be taking place at the park. And I know we talked about some alternatives. I don't know if you have an update on maybe what we might be able to do.
We've proposed some possible alternatives for next year. The other thing that we had 2 sets of low-rise bleachers that were compliant but broken. We're going to replace those, and we're going to get ones that are more portable so that we can bring them up for 4th of July and other festivals that we might have. So there'll certainly be some bleacher seating down there.
Okay.
It may not be as extensive as what it was before. So there may be a need for some chairs or people bringing their own camp chairs, but there will be, I would say, at least 2 sets of low-rise, three level bleachers that we'll buy to replace the ones that were broken out of the proceeds of the auction. And those will only take less than half of that money.
Okay. I know there's some discussions too about perhaps a raised platform. Or so is that an additional option, or is that necessary? Because I know they're pretty well attended. The current bleachers get pretty full during that service. So I don't know if there's still thoughts about a raised platform. And again, Mr. Doherty brought up a good point about having handicap accessibility to that platform for speakers. So I didn't know if that was option B as well with the bleachers, if that's not enough for the capacity people.
We can buy something that would serve that purpose, and we'll consider that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Piles. Any other questions for Steve? Okay, let's go to the engineer's report. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Ghost. Our updated report was in the packet, so that's updated. The only thing I was going to mention is the 2022 street improvements. We had bids range from 398,000 to 433. Our estimate was 410,000, and we provided the bid results in your packet. We recommend to award a contract to Columbus Asphalt Paving in the amount of $398,879.13. So if there's any questions, be glad to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Hall? Okay, let's move on. We will go to the resolutions. First one on our agenda this evening is resolution 2022.03. It's a resolution appointing representatives to the Delaware County Tax Incentive Review Council and declaring an emergency. I believe our 2 representatives are Mr. Martin and Mr. Hennessy. I think the first meeting is in August. I don't think there's any need to move forward this evening, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Hennessy.
Correct. Is that, so what reading are we on? I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, second reading. Okay. We can remove the emergency language if it's not necessary prior to your 3rd reading. There's no reason to have an emergency if there's not a need to.
Mr. Piles, I think we talked earlier about this. I don't believe there's a need, is there?
Usually that meeting's in mid-August, so we should have 30 days. Yes, I think we could get rid of it at the 3rd reading.
Let's
The
do that.
emergency clause.
We'll do that for the 3rd reading. Thank you. Let's go to, we have ordinances, 3rd reading. We're tabling, remains table ordinance number 2021.49. And we have a 3rd reading this evening. This is ordinance number 2022.20, an ordinance amending ordinance number 200731, which is amending the building, engineering and zoning fees for the city of Sunbury. This is our 3rd reading. We're all familiar with that. Any questions? Any further commentary? Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve ordinance number 2022.20.
Motion by Ms. Cooper.
Second.
Second by Mr. Capel. Any further discussion? Mr. Hennessy.
Mrs. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Capel? Yes. Mr. Ghost?
Yes.
Mr. Neff?
Yes.
Mr. Grumney?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you, Mr. Hennessy. Let's go to second readings. We have ordinance number 2022.21. This is an ordinance authorizing the establishment of our credit card accounts and authorized users with expenditure limits. This is our second reading. We discussed this in the past. I believe there is no emergency language here. We can let this go. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Breen.
That's correct. Just second reading tonight.
Thank you, sir. Next up, second reading, we have ordinance number 2022.23. This is an ordinance approving the application of Dovefield Partners LLC and 3Bs&K Holdings LLC to rezone approximately 84.87 plus or minus acres of property located to the west of Interstate 71, south of US 3637, and east of 3Bs&K Road, from not zoned to planned residential district pursuant to the City of Sunbury zoning code and declaring an emergency. We do have the applicant here this evening. Do they wish to offer any further commentary?
Nothing further other than to thank you for your time tonight and to restate the request earlier that you give due consideration to suspension of rules to so we can read that passes and it's an emergency. Thank you very much. Thank you.
May I ask a question of Mr. Breen? The ordinance, this ordinance doesn't mention the divergencies that Mr. Fisher talked about. Is that rolled into what we're going to be voting on?
Yes, it's outlined in the development text, which is referenced with the date within the ordinance. So
Okay.
a lot of the zoning detail isn't in the ordinance itself, but it's all in that development text, which is what Mr. Fisher referenced earlier. With this
Okay.
type of a zoning, a planned development, you can put a lot in the development text.
all
It
right.
really is mutually agreed upon between the municipality and the applicant.
Yeah.
More so than straight zoning that has this much, PRD has packets of information.
I got it. I expected to see the word divergent somewhere in the ordinance, so I'll make a motion to suspend the rules. Second.
Motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ghost. Can I just ask one question? Is that okay, or is that fine? Okay. I know that, as Mr. Reeves stated, we're pretty far down the path, but if I could just ask the applicants to kind of restate their commitment to working with the residents, Mr. McCarthy, to make sure that his concern about the lights, the noise, and the possible things that can be done to help prevent that be committed by the developer.
Sure, I think we've heard both me and Mr. Hill say that we want to work with the neighbors. Mr. Hill said they want to be a good neighbor, so absolutely.
Okay.
We will work on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We did have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Martin and a second by Mr. Neff. Mr. Hennessy, roll call, please.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Motion on the emergency.
Second.
We have a motion on emergency by Mr. Martin and a second by Mr. Neff. Any further discussion? Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Capel,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Ordinance on number 2022.23.
Motion.
Motion.
Motion
Did
for,
I say that?
You said ordinance.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was a motion.
You know what you meant.
motion, there's a motion to, for the record, a motion to approve ordinance 2022.23 by Mr. Martin. Okay.
Second.
Second by Mr. Neff. Further discussion? Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Caplan.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you, Mr. Hennessy. Thank you for the applicants.
I'm right. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to ordinance number 2022.24. This is a second reading on an ordinance approving the execution of a grant agreement with Ohio Department of Natural Resources and declaring an emergency. I had a discussion earlier with Mr. Piles on this. I don't believe we have to move forward this evening. This involves installing the fishing pier at the reservoir and revising the land map, as I understand it.
That's correct. There's 2 items that we've discussed with the Department of Natural Resources. The first is the map that was submitted with the grant encompassed all the land of the reservoir and going all the way to the street across from Mr. Newman's and now our property. We want to reserve the right to possibly develop that as we look at the service department and a fueling station, things like that. They're agreeable to that. We just need to finalize a map that's centered on the reservoir and the parking area. And the second item is we've discussed with them while not very likely, the what if question of the future and our ability to withdraw water from that reservoir for use as potable water and to still have that opportunity. They seem to be agreeable to that. They've asked us to prepare language for that purpose that would go into the agreement with the understanding that it would be maintained still as a viable recreational source and fishing source. It's just who knows what the future holds in terms of water demands in the area. And so we want to at least reserve that right if we need to be able to withdraw potable water from that reservoir. So, but a second reading's fine. We've got till next calendar year to have the project completed. And once we get this item taken care of at a third reading, I think it'll move along fairly quickly.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Any questions for Mr. Piles?
Just, I think you got it, but just so you understand, the map, this is a park grant. So whatever's in that map, the agreement says we're going to use it for park. But we're not going to use everything in the map for park. There's stuff down the street that we're going to build a street department building on that has to get changed. So between your first reading and the second reading, again, Steve's done a good job of getting dialogue with them. They've said, yes, we'll work with you on that. And again, the ability to withdraw water doesn't necessarily affect the fact that we can have a park there, whether it's water for potable, whether it's for emergency, for fire. Water is a resource. People pay big money to have access to water. It costs a lot of money to build water impoundment facilities. Ask the people around Buckeye Lake how important water is. Ask the people that want to build these big facilities that need water for their computers and their cooling systems and all that, how important water is. So it's just an asset that we don't necessarily want to compromise. It's worth the time to do it right. And that's what we're attempting to do. And hopefully we can make even more progress between now and the next
Well,
meeting.
now you raise another question. Is the pump in the creek still viable to get water up to the reservoirs?
It's a good question, and we're actually actively looking at the whole Lowhead Dam and that part of the system now as we speak. Some of you will remember we had that Lowhead Dam fixed, but it's probably been 12, 15 years ago now. They completely redid it. There's a big chunk out of it we discovered in an inspection. There are some large logs up there. Those Lowhead dams, a lot of times there's not much going on, but in a heavy rain, there's a lot of water that flows over them, a lot of treating that goes on. And that's where the inlet is to the pump, which pumps the water up to the reservoirs. I don't know, Dave, if you ask me, probably those reservoirs have some spring feed to them, because even in drought, other than when we were in the water business and using them, you don't really have a lot of level loss in those reservoirs.
Right.
But still, we need the pumps to be able to replenish them to the extent we're taking water out.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a valid one, which we're looking at, making sure we keep that entire operation usable to the extent.
Okay.
needed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Breen, for that color. Okay, let's go to first reading on ordinance number 2022.25. This is an ordinance authorizing the purchase of a video camera system and associated service agreement for the city of Sunbury Police Department and declaring an emergency. So I talked to Chief Howard earlier today, and just for the record, for clarification, as I understand it, and Mr. Breen, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're replacing the on-officer video cameras that we have had for roughly 5 to 6 years, according to Chief Howard. So we're going to replace those. And we're also going to add and we talked about this, I think in our last meeting, the in-car cameras as well. And so our current contract ends end of July, early August. And that is the reasoning for the emergency, so we can get these new materials on order and installed before our current contract ends.
And as the applicant stated tonight, and you've heard time and time again from every one of your departments as they come forward with requests for new equipment, is this whole supply chain thing. You don't know if it will be there next week or 2 weeks from now, or
Right.
3 weeks from now. And we don't want to we don't want to have a gap in service, certainly. That's for the protection of the public, protection of our officers. And we're expanding the system to have those in-car systems. So I know the chief is anxious to get this done. We are going to be financing it. I did put a contingency in the ordinance between now and your first reading. We still have not received the financing documents. There's a notation to it, a one-line notation on the quotation. But I told the chief, talk to him. There's got to be more of an agreement for financing $100,000. I'm sure it's coming. I put in there that he can sign it contingent upon final legal review because I haven't seen it yet. But we would like to get it approved tonight, get the order placed, and move forward so that we don't have a gap in service.
Yeah, for the safety and welfare of our residents as well. So, and also I talked to him earlier, according to the chief, he gave me an estimate of, like you said, Dave, a 5-year payback period financed, and the cost should be somewhere between 90 and 100,000. Which is consistent with, I think, what we discussed at our last meeting.
So does this need to have built into it the words upon legal review?
I inserted it.
Yes.
Oh, you did? All
Yeah,
right.
it's contingent. It should be in your most current version. Yes.
You'll find that on section 2 here is the forward.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just seeing the few little words that are on the, that you're reading to it.
I'll just read it for the record quickly. Under section 2 of that ordinance, council further authorizes the chief of police to execute any and all documentation necessary to secure the purchase, including but not limited to the video storage agreement and documentation to secure the available 5-year financing contingent upon final legal review.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Do we have a motion to suspend the rules?
Motion to suspend the rules on ordinance 2022.25.
Second.
We have a motion to suspend the rules by Mrs. Cooper and a second by Mr. Martin. Mr. Hennessy, go ahead.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Do we have a motion on the emergency?
Motion on the emergency ordinance 2022.25.
Second.
Motion on the emergency by Mrs. Cooper and a second by Mr. Martin. Discussion. Mr. Hennessy.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Capel. Yes. Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
You have a motion on the ordinance.
Yes, motion on the ordinance. Thank you, 2022.25.
Second.
We have a motion on ordinance 2022.25 by Mrs. Cooper and a second by Mr. Martin. Any further discussion? Mr. Hennessy.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you, sir. Let's move on. Again, this is first reading. Now, actually, this is the streets ordinance, and then we get into the building ordinances. So ordinance number 2022.26, this is an ordinance awarding the contract for the 2022 City of Sunbury Street Improvements Project to Capstone and Associates DBA Columbus Asphalt Paving and declaring an emergency. This is what we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting earlier this evening, and Mr. Hall mentioned it in his engineering report. Does anyone wish to add anything further or have any further questions about this? Okay.
I'll motion to suspend the rules.
Motion by Mr. Capel to suspend the rules.
Second.
And a second by Mr. Grumney. Discussion. Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Neff.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Approved 6 ayes.
Motion on the emergency.
Motion by Mr. Capel on the emergency for ordinance number 2022.26.
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Grumney. Any discussion? Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Motion approved 6 ayes.
Thank you.
Motion to approve ordinance number 2022.26.
Motion to approve by Mr. Capel,
Second.
second by Mr. Grumney. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Motion approved 6 ayes.
Thank you. We'll move on. These next 3 ordinances are involving the same thing essentially. I'm going to let Mr. Piles and or Mr. Hennessy provide some color on these. The first one, I'm wondering, Dave, can I read all of these at once and then have Mr. Piles comment in total?
Well, they need to be read individually.
Right.
But if you're the chair of the meeting, if you want to have comments about all 4, they all are all related. So you can read through them and then discuss the totality of them and have specific discussions as to a specific one if you choose. But I think it's a good idea.
Okay, I will read ordinance number 2022.28. This is a first reading. This is an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to submit an application to the State of Ohio Board of Building Standards for certification as a sub-building department and declaring an emergency. Secondarily, we have ordinance number 2022.29. That is an ordinance adopting the 2017 Ohio Building Code and subsequent updates for the city of Sunbury and declaring an emergency. And the third is ordinance number 2022.30, which is an ordinance adopting the 2006 Building Code of Delaware County and prior revisions from 2011 and 2018 and subsequent updates, and declaring an emergency on all 3.
I think we skipped, did we skip 2022 dash?
There is no 27 on the sheet. Should there be?
We're missing one.
Good catch.
Is it not in the packet? Do you have 2022-27 in your packet?
I don't believe we do, no. Unless it's back here.
We do have another ordinance. We need to, Joe, give access to it on your computer. I don't know. It should be in an email. We need a motion and a second to add to the agenda ordinance 2022.27.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mrs. Cooper. I will second.
We will pull it up. It was in the.
No further discussion. Mr. Hennessy, how about a motion to discuss ordinance number 2022.27 and add that to our agenda?
All right. Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mr. Kemp.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
All right. Motion approved 6-0. We will pull it up.
We may not be able to pull it up.
Was this also part of the building codes?
Part of it.
Okay.
This is all part of it. I'll speak to them in total, including 2022-27 that you just added to the agenda. We are going to need to read the title to it. Steve should be able to find it in an email, hopefully. We are looking to transition from the way we've done business when it comes to inspections within the city historically to what we feel is a more thorough, more comprehensive, more detailed approach, more in line with the city status that we, now we're in. We are looking to get certified to have a building department. There are really two options. Through the state, you can get your own building department, or you can become a sub-building department. We are not probably big enough to have our old building department. Steve could speak to the specific requirements, but you have to have a bunch of people on staff. There has to be backups. There has to be a lot of things that just because we're over 5,000 people doesn't mean we're 50,000 people. We're a city, but we're still a small city. This allows us to be a sub-building department and work under the Delaware County's building department that is certified. Use their inspectors for their services. That would give consistency to developers. They'd be developing under the same rules, terms, interpretations, inspectors potentially, as they have in the townships right outside our city limits and within our city limits. So really there are four pieces of legislation that look to approve that. We need to apply to the state of Ohio, to the Department of Building Standards to become a sub-building department. That's an application and that's a process. We have to state within that application who we will be working under, and that would be Delaware County. 2022-27 is the agreement that we would sign with Delaware County to use them, engage them for inspection services. We have historically in Sunbury done single-family residential inspections. We've done them in-house. We have our inspectors that we use. And they've done individual inspections, but it's difficult to do that. The state ordinances and statutes have been pushing us to try to get us to certify. Those people are hard to find. Those inspectors are hard to find. There are conflict of interest rules as far as them doing private work and still being an inspector status within Central Ohio that we've ran into in the past. It's been a difficult formula to maintain. And really moving in this way allows us to be more progressive and towards where most cities end up. So we've got, as we move into this and we use Delaware County, they do not only single family residential inspections, but they do commercial and industrial. So they can offer that service. So again, all of our inspection services versus telling people we have our inspectors for the homes that you want to build, but the commercial building that you want to build on the same property, you've got to have the state of Ohio do it. It'll all be done in one spot through Delaware County. So because we will now be doing not only, and it's not we're actually engaged in the county to perform the service. The county on our behalf will not only be doing single family residential inspections, but they'll also be doing commercial and industrial. There are two additional codes that we need to adopt. And those are the final two ordinances. The Ohio Building Code is commercial, industrial, and Delaware County Building Code. There are a couple portions of the Delaware County Building Code that we've reviewed and have determined do not apply. So we've accepted those from the approval. But that will allow the Residential Building Code of Ohio that we already have adopted and the two codes that would deal with commercial as well as residential, the Ohio Building Code and Delaware County's Building Code to be enforced here in Sunbury. This is the first reading on these ordinances. We don't expect you to pass them tonight, but we wanted to get them out to you. There's a lot there. We're glad to answer questions, but really this is transitioning to having all of the advantages of a full building department, albeit it's not on the square, but it's 15 minutes down the road, 20 minutes down the road. They've been doing it a long time. They do it countywide. When you start talking about all the development that occurs throughout Delaware County, that's not in a municipality, and there's a lot of it, Delaware County does it. So, Steve, anything else on that?
If you want to forward that email to Karen, please.
Can you get me on the Wi-Fi?
Oh,
I'll try.
Can't find it.
The only,
Let me see if I can do it. Maybe I can get my Wi-Fi. And it came from Karen, right? Not from me?
right. Oh, it did, yeah. we can run over and I can run over and get one real fast.
Well, if it doesn't need action tonight, we could do 26, 28, 29, and 30. And then do the first reading on 27 next week or next meeting. And just put it all together then.
It could. Let me see if I have it.
Mhm. So even though it does have emergency language on each of these listed, you're not recommending.
No, we're doing a first reading tonight. This is, we want to give you time to digest it, to answer any questions you might have, read through it, get comfortable with it. It is a possibility we would ask you to pass this on a second reading. Steve's looking to move forward with it, but you know, that's definitely not tonight.
There is a 6-week lead time with the state. We'll have to make application to them. And so if we want to implement on July 1st or August 1st with new building permits, then we would, need to have an emergency to be able to do that.
We could do all 4 of those
Yeah.
emergency next meeting.
At the next
2 weeks.
meeting. The only other thing I would add is that Delaware County, their processes, because of the size, is better than ours. You can submit your plans electronically, which we do by email, but there's 2 or 3 extra steps in that. And you can also online schedule your inspections. And right now, that's a matter of whoever holds that building permit calling our inspector and arranging an appointment. So it will improve that process for our residents. It's also in terms of the commercial activity. The fire department has asked a couple times if we would consider moving under the umbrella of Delaware County. They seem to have a better connection with them than with the state of Ohio. And while it works now, I think it will work better with Delaware County. And we're really not large enough to be able to staff a building department to the level of certifications that are required. One of the other, and it's a small benefit, but it's a significant one. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Last year, we went through the ISO rating for a building department. And it was the first time we got a rating, and it was okay rating. The ISO rating for their building department is going to be better, and that will eventually be reflected back on homeowners' rates that they pay for insurance. So having a better ISO rating for our building department will be also a benefit to all of our residents. So those are some of the reasons to do it. I apologize we didn't, I know I captured that email of 27 and obviously didn't put it where I needed to. But
That's okay, since we're gonna let these ride until next
Yeah,
meeting in
just
2
asked
weeks.
for first
My
reading.
recommendation would be, let's take a 5-minute recess, let's get it, so we can read the title in, so we can have a first reading on it tonight.
Okay.
We've also got an updated letter later on in your agenda, that just arrived during the meeting, from Floyd Brown Todd. It's on your agenda, and we'd asked him to update it. He was attending a charitable function today. He said, "I'm sorry, I just got to it." And he sent it to me. "I hope I'm not too late." And I said, "You're not." But it'd be nice to pass that out, and then we can again, it's a walk across the street. So
Yeah.
I'll walk over, or Steve walk over.
I'll walk
we'll get it.
over and get it.
Do we need a motion to recess?
Just a motion for.
I'll motion to recess for up to 15 minutes if needed. Second by Mr. Grumney. Mr. Hennessy, go ahead.
All right, Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
All right, motion approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you.
I saw the look in Steve's eye as you were saying that, like, how long is he gonna give me to get over there and get back?
He said 5. I said,
Yeah, 5 is booking it.
big joke, I tell everyone this thing.
Daryl, you ready for recording?
Thanks.
A motion to reconvene. I will make that motion.
Second.
Second by Mr. Capel. Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you. Okay, we now have in front of us ordinance number 2022.27. And this also goes along with or dovetails with the 3 that we read prior to the recess. And this ordinance reads, an ordinance approving an agreement for plan review, permitting and inspection services between the County of Delaware, Ohio and the City of Sunbury, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. So as we discussed before we reconvened, these ordinances, 2022.26, this one 2022.27, and 2022.28, and 2022.29.
Yeah, it's not that. It's 27, 28, 29, and 30.
Yes, correct.
You said 26, but we already dealt with 26.
My mistake. Yes, sir. Thank you for that clarification. But these all are part of the same building inspection changes that are being considered. And these are all first readings. There is no need to pass that this evening unless anyone else has anything further to add. We will move on. Okay. I believe that actually does finish all ordinances for this evening's agenda. We have finished and unfinished business. We have one item here, and we talked about this briefly in the Finance Committee meeting. It's the Frost Brown Todd engagement letter by Attorney Aaron Brogdon for some legal services. I'm going to let Mr. Breen detail us on that.
We do have a revised version of the letter that was just received while the meeting was happening. Frost Brown Todd has, and Aaron Brogdon specifically, has done legal work for the village before as outside counsel. It's an engagement agreement to engage them at an hourly rate for services. We're having them look into some zoning issues, specifically with our tree replacement code and a case out of Michigan, a district court case that's been brought into question. We've worked with them to expand the scope, the language of the scope in the letter, and that's the change. And we also removed the $10,000 limitation. The $10,000 limitation was when we thought, honestly, the mayor was going to be approving it prior to the night's meeting. That's his spending limit. Now that you're approving it, we would just as soon approve the letter without any spending limit on it, just in case it goes above and beyond that. We don't have to approve it again. You're still going to you will have to approve any expenditure beyond $10,000 at a future meeting date. That will not occur between now and your next meeting, but the engagement agreement, we would like you to approve the revised version of it tonight.
And that is dated today, correct? That letter that you just showed us for the record?
The letter is dated May the 18th, yes.
And what does it say briefly regarding the expense amount, Mr. Breen?
It doesn't, it's just an hourly rate.
Hourly rate.
The agreement, yeah.
Okay, no cap.
No cap.
We talked about this in the Finance Committee and the reasoning for it briefly. I don't have anything else to add at this time. Does anyone else have any
We
questions
need a
about it?
motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Martin,
Second.
second by Mr. Capel. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you. Okay, any other unfinished or finished business to discuss? Let's start down here, Mr. Neff.
Nothing.
Mr. Martin,
No, thank you.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes, just quickly, someone pointed out to me today that over In the building across from Big Walnut Grill, there's a new sign, a tropical smoothie cafe. I Googled it and Google says it's supposed to open June 20th. So we'll see, looking forward to that.
Excellent.
Also on May 12th, I went to Morpsey and they had a meeting with Dr. Amy Acton. If that name sounds familiar, she was working with Governor DeWine at the beginning of the pandemic, and you probably saw her daily on his updates. She presented with a new nonprofit that she's working with. It's called Rapid 5, and it is it's in the infant stages, so she didn't have very much information, so I can't share too much because I don't have it, but it's basically looking at Central Ohio and what things do we offer naturally already as far as nature goes. So it's looking at our waterways and it's looking at our trails and our hiking. What do we already have and how can we activate it and make it more accessible? How can we tell folks what's in their backyard? And she talked about so it's like working with the folks who at some point helped with developing Central Park in New York. And it's really just about getting people healthy, getting them outside, and a lot of layers to it. Education, swim lessons for kids, water safety, lots of stuff is going to go into it. But she was just sort of just laying it all out as a really big picture. It's going to be nonprofit, and it sounded really interesting. And something what she really talked about was like, you know, sort of she talked about Minnesota, Minneapolis, and how they have an active outdoor life all year round. And how Columbus, we shut down a little bit in the wintertime. It's cold and there isn't anything, there's no programming right now getting us outside. So this would get Central Ohio outside all year round. And they talked a lot about the generation of folks that are going to college or when they're graduating from college and they're not necessarily staying in Central Ohio. And part of that, from what they're hearing, is because the younger they want to be outside, they want to do things. And they also talked about, and we've talked about this in other meetings too, is with so many folks working remotely, the first thought of where I'm going to live isn't necessarily how close is it to work. Now if you can work remotely, you can sort of live, you have more opportunity of where you want to live. So why would folks choose Central Ohio? And what can we do to draw them in and keep them here and keep our young adults here and our grandkids and all that, and keep them all healthy and active and outside? So it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, if you Google that, Rapid 5 is a great website. They have a video out there. And as I understand, they identified 5 different areas right here in Central Ohio, like Southern Columbus.
They were 5 vertical lines and they took them by waterways.
Gahanna, it was one, I think, out in the Hilliard area.
I'd have to look. Oh, there was a Big Walnut. Yeah, I don't remember all of them, but it was all of Central Ohio. It wasn't really Columbus. It was a huge area.
And for those identified areas, they assigned a development company for each area. In fact, Edge is doing, I think they're doing the Gahanna area. But yeah, it was high profile.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
I think Daryl, you've looked at that.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's worth looking at for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be coming back around. You'll hear about Rapid 5. So it was interesting and it was really neat to meet Dr. Amy for sure.
Yeah, and they're doing interconnectivity is a major theme too. So with trails, they want to try to, I think, incorporate bike trails and walking trails and connect everything. It's pretty ambitious.
Yeah. It's very ambitious. Yeah. It'll be a lot, and they're looking to I forget the word, but I forget the right word for it, but basically have money coming in indefinitely. She doesn't want this to just be her project, and then when she's done. She wants to endowment, maybe, is that it? She wants it to be forever. So it was really interesting. Lots more information coming. She said it's so early in the stages, she doesn't even have an email address yet for it. So
excellent. Thank you. Anything, Mr. Capel?
No, nothing here.
Mr. Grundy?
Sure.
I wanted to point out and make special mention, sort of dovetails with what Mr. Pyle said earlier with regard to the day of service, the volunteer day, May the 6th, Friday. Started out a little bit rainy. Myself and Mr. Mayor and Mr. Martin were down at the Peace Pole installation there by Fallen Heroes Memorial. And then we went over and saw the ending of Mr. Weatherby's tree planting, and the sun had come out just at the right time. And lots of happy faces. These kids were really involved. I want to thank the Rotary, Sun Regulator Rotary. Folks did a great job. The kids did a great job. Mr. Martin, in fact, had a song that he sang at the Peace Pole presentation. But for the most part, in tune.
Well, it was raining, so I didn't bring my guitar with me, so, yeah.
It was very, very good, very touching. I liked it. I think everybody appreciated that. So thank you. And Mr. Weatherby's tree worked out great. In fact, you guys looked out there, the blooms. You see the blooms, pink blooms on that thing already?
Yeah, that's nice.
It's great. And thanks, Steve. And Mr. Gerwig, if he's listening. They all did a great job.
When I first saw them come out, I thought they were withering leaves, and it's like, oh no. But they're blooms.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all. Nothing else. Anything from the esteemed, highly paid intellectuals?
Thank you for your patience on the last ordinance.
All right, motion for adjournment. I'll make that motion. Second by Mr. Martin. Mr. Hennessy.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Motion approved, 6 ayes.
Thank you, everybody.
You're gonna get a bad reputation. I told Cindy, I said, we'll be out early. You do all the talking.